This is Billy Carson. He rejects the biblical God and believes that ancient aliens put us on Earth. His evidence? Ancient Sumerian tablets along with newly discovered alien technology that proves the tablets right. UFOs, flying saucers, and anti-gravity machines, all recorded thousands of years ago. Watch this clip from our full documentary.
So you're talking about massive objects flying around.
Right, like, and how do they explain that away? That's what I want to know. How do you explain that away?
How do you explain somebody thousands of years ago sitting down to write a sci-fi epic?
Well, not just that, but writing about a process of creating this field that now has been documented all these thousands of years later.
So the Sumerian tablets and other ancient Mesopotamian sources must be true. Because what ancient person would sit down and write a science fiction story unless there was some truth to it? That's essentially the argument here. In other words, the reason we can trust the ancient texts more than other sacred documents is because they speak of technological advancements far beyond their time. Advancements that modern science has later deemed possible. Let's take a look at a concrete example that Billy uses to illustrate this.
If you take a torus and you put a ferrofluid like Mercury inside of it, and you magnetize the torus in a way that creates this rotation, this RPM of the Mercury moving around that field, and you get it up to about 60,000 RPMs, and then you actually pressurize the torus to about 250,000 atmospheres, and you electrify it, you get anti-gravity properties.
And how do they describe it in the text?
In the text, they talk about the fact that it uses Mercury in a rotating disk.
And the fact that they figure this out and that is it in the Mahabharata or the Bhagavad Gita?
And the Mahabharata.
Wow.
There's a lot of complicated scientific jargon in that clip, but the main idea is that the ancient texts speak of a rotating disk with Mercury in it. And according to Billy, modern science has proven that you can theoretically use substance known as ferrofluids to achieve anti-gravity propulsion. Therefore, the tablets must be correct, given that they describe detailed and futuristic processes that modern science has only recently discovered. But here again, there are some blatant issues in Billy's reasoning. First, Billy claims that the flying Mercury disk comes from the Mahabharata. The Mahabharata is a Sanskrit text that comes from ancient India, and it's entirely distinct from the Sumerian tablets, which come from Mesopotamia. So just to be clear, we are not talking about the Sumerian tablets here, but an entirely different document from an entirely separate religious tradition and culture. With that out of the way, let's deal with the actual claim. It is true that the Mahabharata and other ancient Indian texts do speak of flying objects, known as vimanas. They are often described as flying chariots or flying temples, even entire flying cities. But Billy claims that these vimanas were actually UFOs powered by Mercury, and that this perfectly mirrors what modern science has proven, that you can use ferrofluids to achieve anti-gravity propulsion. Here's the problem. There are no Mercury-powered vimanas found in the Mahabharata. In fact, to date, there is no record of this kind of machine being found in any ancient Indian Sanskrit texts. None at all. So where exactly is Billy getting this from? Well, he's getting this example from a document called the Vimanika Shastra, which is a modern Hindu text that claims to describe how vimanas may have worked. There is absolutely no evidence at this point that the claims of this document are true. In fact, there is no evidence that any version of this document existed before the year 1918. By contrast, the oldest manuscripts of the actual Mahabharata are close to 2,000 years old. In other words, Billy has taken a modern text and read it into the ancient text without telling his audience. At the very least, this is extremely misleading and utterly disproves his so-called evidence. And with that in mind, let's take a look at Billy's next example of ancient technology.
That's exactly what happened in the Emerald Tablets. 36,000 years ago, Thoth he arrives in this place called the land of Kem, ancient Kemet, before it was known as Egypt. And when his ship lands, he opens his doors and he comes out with his crew, and he says the barbarians came at him to attack him with cudgels and spears. He says, I raised my staff and sent out a ray of vibrations, stopping him still as fragments of stone of the mountain. So he had a stun gun. He had a weapon that was, not lethal, non-lethal weapon that can freeze you in your tracks. And we have something just like that now in the military called the active denial system. They can send a beam at a crowd coming to attack and make them stop still right in their tracks.
At the beginning of the clip, you heard him mention the Emerald Tablets. You also heard him mention the name Thoth. The document he's referring to here is called the Emerald Tablets of Thoth the Atlantean, and yes, that is referring to Atlantis. Once again, Billy neglects to give Joe Rogan and the rest of his audience the essential context. First off, there are two texts with very similar names that should not be confused with one another. There is a text called the Emerald Tablet, and then there is also a text called the Emerald Tablets of Thoth the Atlantean. The Emerald Tablet is attributed to legendary figure Hermes Trismegistus, and it's a very short document that has influenced fringe fields like alchemy and occultism, as well as the religion of Hermeticism. Despite its strange content, the Emerald Tablet text is actually a legitimate historical document. Even Sir Isaac Newton wrote a translation of it. However, this is not the document that Billy is talking about. It's very important to understand that. Billy is referencing the Emerald Tablets of Thoth the Atlantean, which is completely different. This text was written in 1930 by a man named Maurice Doreal. Maurice was heavily involved in occultism. He even founded his own cult called the Brotherhood of the White Temple. Where did he get this text from? Well, he claims to have translated the text from 30,000-year-old tablets that he found by himself in the Great Pyramid of Giza. The only problem? The tablets themselves have never been found, and none of his claims have ever been verified. Keep in mind that by 1930, the genre of science fiction was already very well established. For example, French philosopher Voltaire wrote about aliens all the way back in 1752. The fact that Billy Carson, a supposed expert in ancient civilizations, would even cite a source like this, one written by a 20th century cult leader, should tell you something about his scholarship. In fact, much worse than this, he's written an entire book on the Emerald Tablets of Thoth. By the way, even if these two examples had been from reputable sources, which they are not, that still wouldn't change the fact that these sources are not the Sumerian tablets. So let's take a moment and consider an example that Billy quotes directly from the tablets. If you remember, earlier Billy mentioned that human beings were genetically engineered by the Anunnaki in an outdoor laboratory called Eden. If this is true, it certainly would be a groundbreaking example of incredibly early science fiction literature that is thousands of years old. So let's investigate. The story itself seems to come from the Babylonian epic of Atrahasis. Just for the record, this epic is not one of the 7 Sumerian creation tablets, but it is an ancient Babylonian text, and therefore Billy consistently cites it as evidence. The story says that the gods created man using the clay of the earth and the blood of a slain god. Let me read to you an English translation of the Atrahasis creation account, and you can decide if it sounds like genetic modification. Enki made his voice heard, and spoke to the great gods. On the 1st, 7th, and 15th of the month I shall make purification by washing. Then one god shall be slaughtered, and the gods can be purified by immersion. Nintu shall mix clay with his flesh and his blood. Then they answered yes in the assembly." End quote. This account does not have anything even loosely resembling genetic modification. It does sound like an ancient Babylonian myth, but certainly not a science fiction epic. Yet that is the claim that Billy is making, and there seems to be no evidence for it. Billy will frequently offer examples of incredible science and technology in support of his claims. The problem is that when you actually investigate these examples, they don't prove his point at all. In fact, the only thing they do is prove that Billy Carson doesn't know what he's talking about. This brings us to yet another example of Billy's supposed evidence: ancient megalithic structures. For example, he often talks about Machu Picchu and the pyramids. For now, let's focus on the former.
Machu Picchu struck me because, first of all, it's a very arid place. When you talk about the ability to build an entire sustainable civilization that high up, these people had learned and mastered how to work the land in this very dry, arid place. And what's interesting is a lot of those mountains that are surrounding Machu Picchu, when you're there in person, you begin to look at them, you begin to see that way high up, there's carvings in the sides of the mountain's faces that have been carved. The locals say that these are the beings that came down from the heavens that helped build this fortress.
Billy is correct that Machu Picchu in Peru is an incredible feat of ancient engineering. But he then says that the indigenous peoples of the area believe that a race of advanced beings helped them build the site. Therefore, Billy's claims of the ancient alien Anunnaki interacting with mankind must be correct, right? Not so fast. First off, it is entirely possible to acknowledge that ancient people built incredible things without having to acknowledge also that all of their religious claims are true. For example, if someone showed Billy a beautiful European cathedral that took hundreds of years to construct, it's not as if Billy would instantly convert to Christianity. Secondly, even assuming that the claim of the natives around Machu Picchu is correct, assuming that an advanced being did instruct them on how to build the site or even help them do it, who is to say that this advanced being was not a demon? Christians most certainly do have a category for a powerful spiritual being who is not the creator God. More than this, Christians even have an example in Scripture itself of dark spiritual forces leading to the creation of a massive ancient structure, the Tower of Babel. So Billy's so-called evidence here would not disprove Christianity at all, nor would it prove that Billy's theory is correct. The fact is, we don't know exactly how these ancient structures were built because we weren't there. That's what makes places like Stonehenge and the Great Pyramid so incredibly fascinating and mysterious. But Billy Carson grabs onto these mysteries and then imposes his strange concoction of aliens, ancient texts, and sci-fi on them. Of course, in reality, most of his theories are half-baked at best, and at worst, are completely fabricated. To illustrate, here's an example of Billy doing the exact same thing with the Egyptian pyramid.
Online, it'll say 2500, 2600 BC, right? You're saying 36,000, right? One, how do you know it's 36,000? And based on your research, what are you finding that the way they build this?
Well, when you look into the Emerald Tablets of Thoth, right, which is why I wrote the book, Compendium of the Emerald Tablets, he says in some of the opening verses, he said, "Builded I the Great Pyramid, patterned after Earth's force, so that it too might remain through the ages." He's saying, I built the Great Pyramid. And to give me the key to the time frame, those tablets are around 36 to 38,000 years old.
If you want to understand Billy Carson and his devoted followers, you must understand his tactics in videos like these. The Great Pyramid of Giza is one of the most incredible feats of ancient architecture. There's no denying it. And the fact remains that we really don't know exactly how they built something like this in the ancient world. It is estimated that it's made of 2.3 million blocks, weighing a total of about 6 million tons. Some of the heaviest blocks weigh 80 tons apiece, and yet they were transported from a quarry in Aswan, Egypt, over 550 miles away. How exactly did ancient people do this without the benefit of modern machines? Well, we truly don't know. All we can do is give our best guess. But Billy Carson knows that this is an area of conjecture, and that any honest scientist will have to acknowledge that we don't have an official perfect answer. And this is where he comes in and solves the puzzle for you, or at least claims to. According to his groundbreaking research, the pyramids are 36,000 years old, and they were built by the king of Atlantis, who was an advanced alien being. How does he know this? Well, because Thoth wrote the whole story for us on the Emerald Tablets. Billy will typically then give a series of scientific so-called evidences for this idea as well. The problem is not so much what Billy's telling you as it is what he has decided not to tell you. What he's failed to mention is that scientists don't fully agree on the precise dating of the Great Pyramid of Giza, and his 36,000-year theory is only held by a very small and fringe group of scholars. And what he also fails to mention is that his beloved Emerald Tablets of Thoth have never actually been discovered. Worse than this, the only record we have of the text in this document centers on the subjective opinions of a degenerate cult leader. We must begin to notice the pattern here. Whenever Billy encounters something mysterious and unknown, he instantly connects it to his ancient alien theory. It doesn't matter how loose the connection is or how vague the evidence is. He has a religion, and he wants to persuade you to join it. Enjoyed this video? Watch the next clip or watch the full documentary. Fight for Truth is powered by viewers like you. Become a monthly patron for as little as $7 and get free exclusive merch after 3 months. Help us reach 100 patrons and make more videos like this one. Thank you and God bless.